Okay, so picture this. You're stepping back in time, right into the heart of French royalty, surrounded by luxury gardens and those iconic gilded everything.
It's Versailles, isn't it?
Versailles, exactly. And we're not just daydreaming, we're diving deep into all the tips and tricks to make your visit absolutely epic.
That's right. We've got a mountain of articles and forum posts all about conquering those infamous crowds, maximizing your time there, and uncovering those hidden gems you won't find in the guidebooks.
This is the ultimate Versailles deep dive.
Exactly.
So let's get started. First things first, Versailles. It's huge EE.
It really is. People underestimate that a lot.
Yeah, and it seems like everyone wants to experience it. So how do we tackle the crowds?
Well, the overwhelming consensus is weekdays are your friend, especially Wednesdays and Thursdays.
Makes sense, less people taking time off work.
Right. But here's a curveball. Tuesdays can get surprisingly busy.
Oh, why is that?
Well, the Louvre is closed on Tuesday, so guess where all those tourists head?
Straight to Versailles. Yeah.
Exactly. And weekends. Well, let's just say if you love that bustling, energetic vibe, go for it. But if you prefer a bit more breathing room,
Maybe not the best choice.
yeah. So strategic timing is key. But even on a less crowded day, those entry lines can be a real drag.
Definitely, I've seen pictures. They can be insane. What's the secret to avoiding a catastrophe?
The online world is unanimous. Book a timed entry ticket online. I can't stress this enough.
So it's not just recommended, it's essential.
Absolutely. Think of it like your fast pass to bypass that general admission line.
Okay, timed entry ticket check. But I'm also seeing a lot of chatter about security lines. Even with timed entry, it seems those are unavoidable.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the reality of visiting such a high-profile place. Security is tight, so lines are inevitable. But here's a pro tip straight from the forums. Be at the palace gates when they open at 9:00 a.m.
Wow, that's early. Is it really that crucial?
One person said they arrived at 8:55 and the line already stretched across the whole courtyard. It's all about minimizing wait times and getting a head start.
Okay, early bird gets the Versailles worm, I'm convinced. But for those of us who aren't exactly morning people, is there any wiggle room?
Well, some forum users suggest a late afternoon visit as an alternative. Many tour groups have left by then, so it might be a bit quieter.
Interesting, but that probably means less time to actually explore everything. Right?
Exactly. It's a trade-off. Less crowds, but also less time. So yeah, early arrival seems to be the winner for most.
Got it. But waiting around, even if it's a shorter line, can still be a bit boring, right?
Yeah.
Any tips for making that time more enjoyable?
I'm so glad you asked. This is where I get to recommend something that makes everything so much easier. Booking a skip-the-line tour through Get Your Guide.
Ooh, tell me more.
It's a total game changer. The link is in the episode description. But basically, it not only includes your timed entry to the palace, it also bundles in access to the gardens, which often need a separate ticket.
So it's like a one-stop shop for a stress-free Versailles experience.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds amazing. All right, so we've braved the crowds and we're finally inside the palace. Where do we even begin?
Think of the palace as a journey through time, and remember this, it's a one-way system.
No backtracking.
Nope. So savor each room, each detail as you go. You won't get a second chance.
That's both exciting and a little nerve-wracking. I'd hate to miss something amazing. Are there any must-sees we should prioritize?
The Hall of Mirrors is obviously iconic. It's where history unfolded, treaties were signed, lavish balls were held. It's a visual feast, but be prepared. It's a crowd magnet, especially during peak hours.
Okay, Hall of Mirrors check. But I'm also intrigued by something else I've seen mentioned, the King's Private Apartments tour. What's the verdict on that?
Now, this is where opinions get interesting. It seems to be a love it or hate it experience.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some people thought it was a bit dry, focusing on less extravagant areas of the palace, but others raved about the insights it offered, a real peek behind the curtain of royal life.
So how do we know if it's worth our precious time?
Ask yourself this, are you fascinated by personal stories, the intimate details of how Louis XIV actually lived? If so, this tour might be for you. It's guided too, so you get all those extra anecdotes and explanations.
I do love a good story.
Yeah.
That's tempting. Speaking of guidance, I've seen lots of people talking about audio guides. Are they essential or more of a nice to have?
In a place this steeped in history with stories literally tucked into every corner, Audio guides are a game changer. They enrich the experience tenfold. You can choose from the official Palace app or the highly recommended Rick Steves audio guide. Both offer a wealth of context and interesting tidbits.
I can already picture myself wandering those halls, totally immersed in the stories. Okay, so we've tackled the palace, but what about those legendary gardens? Everyone keeps saying, be prepared to walk.
Oh, and they're not kidding. The gardens are immense, a true masterpiece of landscaping and design. If you're a walking enthusiast, you'll be in paradise.
But if marathons aren't exactly my thing,
Consider renting a bike or a golf cart. It's a fun, efficient way to cover more ground, and honestly, who wouldn't want to zip around those gardens in style?
options are always good. I did see some debate in the forums about the location of the bike rentals versus the golf carts. Any insights on that?
It seems the bike rentals are a bit further from the palace entrance compared to the golf carts. And for those who prefer a more leisurely pace, there's always the mini train which can shuttle you around the vast grounds.
So many choices. This is already making me want to pack my bags.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got transportation sorted. But with gardens this vast, where do we even begin?
The gardens themselves are already breathtaking. Think meticulously manicured lawns, ornate fountains hitting groves. But for a truly unique experience, I recommend venturing out to Marie Antoinette's estate and the Hamlet.
Now, that's what I call a hidden gem. Marie Antoinette, the queen, known for her love of luxury. And, well, let's just say things didn't end well for her.
Definitely. But what's fascinating is the contrast between the opulence of the main palace and the more intimate, almost whimsical atmosphere of Marie Antoinette's domain. The Hamlet in particular is like stepping into a fairy tale. She had this miniature village, built a place to escape the pressures of court life.
I can definitely see the appeal after being surrounded by such grandeur. A bit of simplicity must have been refreshing. Okay, so we've got the palace, the gardens, Marie Antoinette's estate. How do we even fit all of this into a single day?
A full day is ideal, but if you have to prioritize, here's a tip I found particularly clever. Visit the gardens first, then the Trianon, which includes Marie Antoinette's estate, and finally the palace.
That's interesting. So you're working your way back through time in a sense.
Yeah.
But why this specific order?
It's all about crowd management. The palace tends to get the most congested, especially as the day goes on. By starting with the gardens and the Trianon, you're more likely to enjoy those areas with fewer people.
Smart move. I'm taking notes. Gardens first, then the Trianon, then the palace. What about lunch? Should we pack a picnic, or are there decent places to eat there?
While restaurants are available, the forums paint a consistent picture. They can be pricey and have long wait times, especially during peak season. Packing a picnic and finding a serene spot in the gardens is a much more relaxed and cost-effective option.
Plus, who wouldn't want to dine with a view fit for royalty?
Exactly.
I'm sold on the picnic idea. Okay, before we wrap up this part of our Versailles deep dive, any final ticketing tips? I know we mentioned the Paris Museum Pass, but do you have any insights on that?
The Paris Museum Pass is a fantastic deal if you're planning on visiting multiple museums and attractions in Paris, including Versailles and the Trianon. However, it's important to remember that it doesn't cover the gardens. You'll need separate tickets for those, especially on musical fountain show days.
That's a good point to remember.
Hmm.
Anything else we should keep in mind about tickets?
Definitely children under 18 and EU residents under 26 get free admission to the palace. However, they'll still need tickets for the gardens, especially if you're visiting on a musical fountain show day. And always double-check the Versailles website for the most up-to-date ticket prices and schedules, as they can vary depending on the season and day of the week.
Excellent advice. So much valuable information to help us conquer Versailles. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's pause here and come back for part 2, where we'll
Delve even deeper into those forum discussions you shared. It's one thing to get the essential planning tips, but what about those real-life experiences, those unexpected discoveries? That's where the real magic lies.
I love that idea. Getting those firsthand accounts really brings it all to life.
Right. It's like you're getting a sneak peek before you even go.
Yeah.
What really stood out to me was how much people emphasize just soaking in the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in checking things off the list.
Exactly. It's not just about seeing it. It's about feeling it, experiencing the grandeur, the history, the sheer opulence of Versailles.
Were there any specific examples of how people really did that?
Oh, yeah. One person described sitting on a bench in the gardens, just listening to the birdsong and imagining what it was like centuries ago, people strolling through those same gardens.
Wow. I get chills just thinking about that.
Right. And another person mentioned feeling goosebumps while walking through the Hall of Mirrors, thinking about all the historical figures who'd been in that very space.
Those are the moments that make a trip truly memorable.
Absolutely. Speaking of the Hall of Mirrors, I'm seeing a lot of discussion about how crowded it can get.
Makes sense. It's probably The iconic spot in the palace.
Definitely. So one strategy that kept popping up was to visit it either early in the morning,
Before the tour groups arrive.
exactly, or later in the afternoon when they've already left.
That's a good tip. Another suggestion I saw was to linger near the windows.
Ah, for a different perspective.
Yeah, and maybe a moment of peace away from the crowds.
Smart thinking. And speaking of crowds, we talked about that one-way system inside the palace.
Yeah, I'm definitely picturing myself trying to backtrack and getting stopped by a very polite but firm palace guard.
Haha, I can see it now. But seriously, you really do need to be mindful of that as you're exploring. Once you've passed through a room or a section, you can't go back.
So take your time, soak it all in.
That's the key. And speaking of soaking it all in, what about the King's private apartments tour? We talked about how opinions were divided.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about what people actually experienced.
One person described it as walking through history's dressing room, getting a glimpse into the more intimate side of Louis XIV's daily life.
Interesting.
Yeah, they love seeing his personal objects, the furniture, the spaces where he actually spent his time.
But I know some people found it a bit underwhelming. What was the main issue for them?
It seems they were expecting the same level of opulence as the staterooms.
More gold, more marble, more wow factor.
Exactly. They felt the private apartments were a bit too well private.
So it really depends on what you're looking for.
Absolutely. If you're all about the grand spectacle, it might not be the best fit. But if you're interested in those behind-the-scenes stories...
And it could be right up your alley.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this brings up a good point. A few people mentioned that Versailles can be a bit overwhelming if you don't have a plan.
Yeah, it's easy to get sensory overload.
Right. So one person suggested doing a virtual tour of the palace and gardens online before you even go.
Oh, that's a great idea. Kind of like a virtual scouting mission.
Exactly. It helps you get a sense of the layout, the scale, and the key highlights so you can prioritize what you want to see.
Love it. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the must-sees, but what about those hidden gems, the things that most visitors miss?
One that kept popping up was the Coach Gallery.
The Coach Gallery.
Yeah, it's located in the royal stables and houses, this incredible collection of carriages, coaches, and other horse-drawn vehicles used by the French monarchy.
Oh, wow. I can picture those ornate gilded carriages.
It's like stepping back in time to a world of travel and luxury.
Definitely adding that to my list.
Why?
What else?
Another gem that was mentioned a lot was the town of Versailles itself.
Oh, interesting. I feel like that often gets overlooked.
It does. People tend to focus solely on the palace, but the town has its own unique charm and history.
So what should we check out in the town?
One person recommended strolling along Rue de la Paroisse.
What's that like?
It's a charming street lined with shops and restaurants, a great place to soak up the local atmosphere.
Love that. And I think I also saw something about a church.
You did. It's called the Notre Dame de Versailles, a beautiful church dating back to the 17th century.
Wow. So much history everywhere you turn.
That's Versailles for you. And if you're an art enthusiast, keep an eye out for the contemporary art exhibitions.
Oh, right. I read about those.
They feature installations and works that interact with the history and architecture of the palace.
So it's like a dialogue between the past and the present.
Exactly. It's a really unique way to experience Versailles. And of course, we can't forget about the musical fountain shows and the musical gardens.
Those seem to be a highlight for a lot of people.
The musical fountain shows are this spectacular display of water and music. The fountains come alive with choreographed jets that dance to classical music.
I've seen videos. It's truly mesmerizing.
And the musical gardens offer a more serene experience. You wander through the beautifully manicured landscapes while classical music fills the air.
Both sound amazing. Okay, before we move on to part 3 of our Versailles deep dive, any final words of wisdom from the forums?
One piece of advice that stuck with me was to embrace the unexpected. Don't get so caught up in your itinerary that you miss those spontaneous moments, those little discoveries that often make a trip truly special.
That's such a great reminder. Sometimes the best experiences are the ones we don't plan for. Absolutely. Letting go of that rigid schedule can lead to some amazing experiences.
Totally agree. Now, speaking of those special experiences, remember those separate tickets you need for the gardens on certain days?
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier.
Well, that's because those are the days with those incredible musical fountain shows.
Oh, right. I'd love to hear more about those. What makes them so special?
Imagine this. You're strolling through the gardens, the sun is shining, and suddenly music starts playing. Then the fountains come alive, these choreographed jets of water dancing to the rhythm.
Wow, it's like the gardens are putting on a performance.
Exactly. It's a sensory feast, truly a spectacle.
I can see why those days require separate tickets. Is there anything we should keep in mind if we want to experience the musical fountain shows?
Definitely check the schedule in advance. They run on specific days and times. And of course, be prepared for bigger crowds. Those days are popular.
Noted.
Mm.
Definitely adding that to the must-do list. But what if we're not there on a musical fountain show day? Is there still a way to enjoy the gardens with music?
Absolutely. On those days, you can experience the musical gardens. It's a more peaceful vibe. Imagine strolling through those beautiful landscapes while classical music plays softly in the background.
That sounds lovely.
Uh,
Okay, so we've got options for both a grand spectacle and a tranquil experience.
hmm.
But before we wrap up our Versailles adventure, are there any hidden gems beyond the palace and gardens? Anything truly off the beaten path?
There is. One article mentioned the Royal Tennis Court.
A tennis court.
Yeah, but this isn't just any tennis court. It's where a pivotal moment in French history happened, the tennis court oath.
Okay, I have to admit I'm not familiar with that. What happened there?
It was during the French Revolution back in 1789. Members of the Third Estate were locked out of their usual meeting hall. So they gathered in this tennis court and swore an oath not to disband until they drafted a constitution.
Wow, so it was a real turning point.
Absolutely, a bold act of
I,
defiance.
I love that how a simple tennis court can hold such historical significance. It reminds us that history happens everywhere.
Exactly. And speaking of history, there's another fascinating place worth checking out, the Potager du Roi.
The Potager du Roi, what's that?
It's the king's kitchen garden, created in the 17th century to supply the royal court with fresh produce.
A royal garden.
Yes. Fruits, vegetables, herbs. It was meticulously planned, and amazingly, it's still in operation today.
Wow, so we could taste the fruits literally of a garden designed centuries ago. That's incredible.
It really is a testament to the power of nature and human ingenuity.
We've uncovered some amazing hidden treasures in this deep dive. Any final advice for someone planning their own trip to Versailles?
I think the most important thing is to approach it with a sense of curiosity and be open to discovery. Don't be afraid to wander, explore, and let your intuition guide you. There's something magical to be found everywhere, from the grand halls of the palace to the quiet paths in the gardens.
Beautifully said. And for those who want to make the most of their time and skip those long lines, don't forget to check out the Get Your Guide tour link in the episode description.
So go forth and experience the wonder that is Versailles.
Happy travels.